on here? Okay. Very much an honor. When I was contacted about the possibility of coming and teaching, at first I thought maybe I was going to be teaching just the young people, which I'm glad to get to teach everyone. And I was contacted because, if I remember correctly, they were studying some matters about creation and evolution. So I don't know that I even asked, but I just kind of assumed, I guess, that that's what I was supposed to be teaching and preaching on. So thus the lessons of the day. If you had asked me to teach or preach on something else, that would have been fine too. If it was anything hard, I just would have said, well, just get Ben to do that. But anyway, I'm glad to be here today to talk to you about something in Bible class that is not, admittedly, not a normal Bible class subject matter. But one of the reasons I talk about this occasionally, and sometimes when I'm at other places, it might be on a Friday or a Saturday, sometimes in a Bible class period, because most people don't ever hear about these things in school. And so we want people to hear about, really, about how there is no real evidence for evolution and atheistic evolution or any kind of evolution as you think about the general theory of evolution, even though most people would consider it to be a fact, said Stephen Jay Gould back in Newsweek a few decades ago now. Stephen Jay Gould, many of you would recognize that name. He was probably one of the more well-known atheistic evolutionists of the latter part of last century and the early part of this century. He said that evolution is a fact like apples falling out of trees. Thomas Hayden in U.S. News and World Report a few years ago said, by now scientists say evolution is no longer just a theory, it's an everyday phenomenon, a fundamental fact of biology, as real as hunger and as unavoidable as death. And notice that you have on the cover there, evolution, where we came from, where we're going. Wow, that sounds like important questions. But if you think about those questions and answer them from purely a naturalistic perspective, I mean, think about that. Where did you come from? Where are you going? What does that say about your purpose? You realize that atheism and atheistic evolution, taken to its logical conclusion, then you and I have no more greater value than an Alabama red ant or a cockroach or a squirrel or a deer or any other living organism, and not just or any other inanimate object, because we all supposedly came from, you read it for yourself, from leading atheistic evolutionists, ultimately from nothing, and that we came from lifeless matter once matter somehow got here. You know, atheism, taken to its logical conclusion, says that, in fact, there was the Texas Scientist of the Year back in, I think it was around 2006, 2007. He got up in I guess some kind of banquet hall where he was receiving an award and said, "We are no better than bacteria." And he was actually going on talking about how there are allegedly too many people on the planet and we need to decrease the number of people. Interestingly, he wasn't the first one to raise his hand and say, well, I'll volunteer, to go first. It's always someone else, And, atheism taken to its logical conclusion says your life is worthless. You didn't come from anything. You're not going anywhere. In fact, that you don't have a soul. In fact, atheism, taken to its logical conclusion, says you don't even have free will. Think about that. You allegedly don't even have free will. You are just as leading atheists have stated, you're just a bunch of meat and chemicals that are bouncing around. You're a meat machine. You're a meathead. And that's all you are. I mean, according to atheistic evolution. You don't have a soul. You don't ultimately have a mind. You don't have free will, which begs the question, if I don't have free will, then how can I decide to be an atheist if I am a Christian and a creationist now? If I don't have free will, why are you trying to convince me of atheism if that is the case? What's the point? Well, here are just a few other examples. Michael LePage wrote in New Scientist in 2008, he said, evolution is as firmly established a scientific fact as the roundness of the earth. So factual is evolution, supposedly, that a few years ago, the Cobb County Board of Education decided they were going to put a sticker in the front of textbooks, something like this, a sticker that says, "This textbook contains material on evolution. Evolution is a theory, not a fact regarding the origin of living things. This material should be approached with an open mind, studied carefully, and critically considered." So here's a school board that, in my judgment, they were trying to do some good and help the students understand that, hey, you're going to read about stuff like you came from ape-like creatures millions of years ago, by the way, and also you're going to read about how life came from non-life, etc. This textbook contains material on evolution. Evolution is a theory, not a fact. Now, I realize that there are different definitions of the term theory when you look it up in the dictionary. And so exactly how they were using the word, maybe that's up for some debate. But what they are getting at is it's not a proven. The origin of life by way of evolution is not a fact. We've already just briefly gone over that. Life does not come from non-life. And so the sticker says, hey, this material should be approached with an open mind, studied carefully, and critically examined. However, as you can imagine, the ACLU got involved along with 2 or 3 parents. One of them I met a few years ago in Cobb County, Georgia. The ACLU filed a lawsuit seeking the Cobb County School Board to remove the stickers from the textbooks. This sticker contains material on evolution. Evolution is a theory, not a fact regarding the origin of living things. Let's study it carefully. A federal judge refused to dismiss the lawsuit because the disclaimer could have the effect of advancing religion. We sure wouldn't want that to happen in this country, right? By the way, I was tickled and excited to hear about your emphasis on evangelism in the coming year. That's great. I love to hear it, and I hear it a lot. Maybe not enough, but I'm hearing it. It seems like a lot. I know we have a renewed push and emphasis for that at Wetumpka. Listen, brothers and sisters, Christianity can be summed up in these 2 phrases. I want to go to heaven, and I want to take as many people with me as possible. It's real simple, right? You love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and you love your neighbor as yourself. And if we love our neighbors as ourselves, we're not just going to feed them. We're not just going to help them when they have a house fire. We're not just going to help them like we just had a tornado down in Wetumpka again a few days ago, not far from where my house is. We're not just going to help them physically. We want to help them spiritually get to heaven. We want to help people. But for a lot of folks in this country, they don't like the idea of advancing religion whatsoever. And supposedly, that sticker that you read could have the effect of advancing religion. While the disclaimer has, well, thank you for admitting that, has no biblical reference, it encourages students, young people, think about this, please. It encourages students to consider alternatives other than evolution. Does that sound like they're a little bit afraid of you all thinking outside of the box that they want to put you in? You know, I raised my kids wanting them to know God, wanting them to know the Bible and Jesus and become Christians. But I also exposed them to other things that they were going to face in the real. One of those was evolution. I read a statement by an evolutionist this last week who said, my mom and dad wouldn't let me learn anything about evolution, and when I got out on my own, I learned about it and I accepted it and I think it's great, etc., etc. I'm not saying we shouldn't be careful, but I am saying, hey, you know what? My kids are going to be in the real world one day, and they're grown now. And, well, you know, they're kind of grown, I guess you could say. One of them's got his job. I got 2 kids in college. Can you believe that, Johnny? I got 2 kids in college, and one already graduated from college. I look at Johnny because we were at school together at Freed Hardeman. I know he looks much older than me, but we are about the same age, I think. It's just the beard, man. I'm sorry, Johnny. It's just the beard, you know it. But it's fun. I got 2 kids in college, and they get this long Christmas break, and then I have one son who's out in the real world working now. And it's like, when are you coming home for Christmas? I might be there by Christmas Eve. I don't know. You know, it's like my other kids get 6 weeks off for, you know, whatever. Where in the world was I going with that? Well, I was thinking about, you know, the person who said, hey, when I was growing up, my mom and dad didn't let me hear anything about it. Well, parents, we need to educate our kids to the very best of our abilities. It's not just sending them off to school and assuming everything they hear is going to be right. It's also not assuming the worst about everything and every teacher they ever have. I'm so thankful that my 10th grade biology teacher, he was the head of an organization called Teens for Christ. And he also was a strong creationist. Having a biology teacher in high school who was a strong creationist, that doesn't happen much these days according to statistics. Because about 10 plus years ago, 84% of all science teachers in public schools were evolutionists, not creationists. And so that not very many. In fact, that same biology teacher I had, he became a vice principal of the school, and years later invited me to come back to this high school that has about 2,000 students to teach about problems with evolutionary theory. Interestingly, some of the teachers would not allow their kids to come hear about that. So we have a sticker that says, hey, let's study this carefully, critically, with an open mind, but then, the federal judge says, wait a second, this could cause students to think about things other than evolution. My problem is, if evolution is true, what does it have to fear? It's kind of like, I know that God exists, I know the Bible is the Word of God, and that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And yeah, I hear criticisms about God, the Bible, and Jesus on a regular basis. But you know what? I'm not afraid of any of them. You know why I'm not afraid of any of them? Because I know that God is true, Jesus is true, His Word is true. And I don't accept that just blindly. Jesus doesn't want you to accept that blindly. He came to earth to prove that He was the long-awaited Messiah, that they had been prophesying, the prophets had been prophesying about for thousands of years. And so He came, and when He stood up in Nazareth, in Luke chapter 4, He got the scroll of Isaiah, He read from Isaiah, He chose, if I remember correctly, it was Isaiah chapter 61. He reads from it, He sits down, or maybe before He sits down, He says, today this reading is fulfilled in your hearing. He was proving, He was using evidence. He didn't just expect people to believe in Him without any evidence. That's why He worked the miracles that He worked. It wasn't just because He was a nice person who wanted to help people. It was to prove that He was who He was. And so I say this to say we don't have to be afraid of anything. We don't have to walk. That doesn't mean we know everything, but it doesn't mean that we have to walk in fear. And if atheistic evolution is so true, what do they have to be concerned about? Why are they so worried that people might consider? This just sounds so cultish to me. This just sounds like, well, this is what we do, and we can't allow you to think any other way. What has been revealed in the last few years is that Christians are very much free speech. And there's a lot of people in this country who are not very free speech, and they want you to hear and think and believe and only learn about one particular thing. Now, truth is truth, and we ought to follow truth. The truth doesn't have anything to fear. U.S. District Judge Clarence Cooper said the sticker also has the effect of implicitly bolstering alternative religious theories or origins by suggesting that evolution is a problematic theory even in the field of science. By denigrating evolution, oh no, we can't have that. The school board appears to be endorsing the well-known prevailing alternative theory, creationism or variations thereof, even though the sticker does not specifically reference any alternative theories. You see what I'm getting at here is that we have this, we can't even supposedly question it. It is a fact. You can't put a sticker in that. This sticker was claimed unconstitutional, and they removed all the stickers from the textbooks. It's a theory, not a fact, regarding the origin of living things. The law of biogenesis says that in nature all life comes from previous life of its own kind. Furthermore, shouldn't we look at things with an open mind, carefully and critically? Isn't that a great description of how we ought to read our Bibles? Don't read your Bible. I shouldn't read my Bible thinking, well, I know exactly everything that God wants me to know. Let me just go to the Bible to reaffirm everything I already think, believe, know, and do. No, we need to open it up, if at all possible, with a fresh start every day. Remembering what God's already communicated to us through His Word. Build upon that. But we come to God's Word with an open mind, and we look at it not carelessly, but critically and carefully. It's just amazing to me that this sticker got removed from the textbooks, because what has been going on in this country for a lot of decades now is a lot of bullying of Christians and creationists, and I'm a firm believer Christians should not respond with bullying tactics. We should respond we should respond in love. We should respond with truth, with reason, the way that Jesus responded, the way that the early church responded. That doesn't mean that we're not passionate about this, but we need to respond with reason, with truth. We need to be able to talk about this. And one of the things about evolutionary issues is young people oftentimes, as you and I, when we were in school, young people oftentimes, they hear these things in school and they never hear them talked about anywhere else, and so they grow up thinking this must be true. And so in books like Evolution, Change Over Time, which is only a 100-page textbook. This was a middle school textbook that I got from Graves County, Kentucky. One of my buddies used to live there, and he did some school teaching at one time. And so we're talking about a 100-page textbook that was used probably over a period of about 1 quarter. And you would think that in a textbook titled Evolution, Change Over Time, that they would put the very best, the very best. We're talking about 100 pages, and there's a whole lot of pictures in here. The very best proof of evolution. So one of the prominent proofs in this book, you got to have about a whole page on it, roughly, and has been in textbooks now for decades, is the idea of the English peppered moth somehow being some kind of proof of evolution. Now they would say it's proof of evolution by way of natural selection, and Christians don't have any problems, creationists don't have any problems with the idea of natural selection or selective adaptation. Listen, if there is a 3-legged gazelle and a 4-legged gazelle, which one is the lion going to catch first? Okay? There are some animals that you might say, for lack of a better term, they're kind of weeded out because an eagle can get this one faster than that one, or a lion can. Or if you have a lame giraffe, well, that lame giraffe, that sick giraffe, well, it's less likely to survive, less likely to adapt than a healthy one. Well, so a textbook like this on page 61 talks about how in the 1850s, most of the peppered moths near Manchester, England were gray in color. Only a few black moths existed because the gray moths were almost the same color as the tree trunks on which they lived. They were nearly invisible to the birds that hunted them for food. So, supposedly, you had the lighter colored moths making up about 95% of the English peppered moth population. And then you have this industrial revolution that takes place, and as more factories were built in the area, soot from the chimneys blackened the tree trunks. The gray moths could now be seen against the tree trunks. The few surviving black moths, however, now blended in with the tree trunks. As a result, they survived. And so we have a shift in the English peppered moth population so that the darker ones became much more numerous, making up about 95% of the population. This was in textbooks as far back as 1978. Dr. Kettlewell, who was the one who introduced this story back in 1955 as evidence of natural selection, did so, and it's appeared in many textbooks since then. The problem is these moths do not rest or live on tree trunks, at least not normally. Very few of these have ever been seen resting on the tree trunks in the past 60-plus years. Kettlewell actually glued 2 dead moths on tree trunks to take his now famous photographs. That's how he got them there. But he had a theory, he had an idea, he had a hypothesis. Since then, it has appeared in many biology texts as evidence for evolution. Notice this one goes back to when I was 3 years old, the one there on the screen. Dr. Kettlewell's results, furthermore, have never been replicated. So he came up with this story, this idea, this hypothesis, which he tested allegedly, and yet anyone else who has ever looked at it, examined it, tested, have never come up with the same results that he did. So what should have happened to this story? It should not be in the textbooks, which leads us to ask, why is it in there? Well, there was a Canadian textbook writer who was asked about this a few years ago. You can find, if I recall correctly, the discussion of this is in Jonathan Wells' book, Icons of Evolution. And he was asked, basically, why is this in the textbooks? And he said, well, you have to look at the audience. How convoluted do you want to make it for the first-time learner? It's got to be kind of simple, not so convoluted. Well, wait a minute. So we're just going to tell them things that aren't right? The idea of this example of natural selection is that it is extremely visual. Yeah, but it's wrong. So who cares if it's visual? It's wrong. Yeah, but it's visual. So we're just going to, entertain kids but not really tell them what's the truth? Young people don't want that. I don't believe they do. We want to get the idea of, we want to get across the idea of selective adaptation later on. High school students, can look at the work critically. The problem is high school students, college students, they hear the same evidence as alleged proof of evolution. Listen, we have an AP camp, we call it, Apologetics Press Week of Camp at Indian Creek Youth Camp right outside of Jasper, Alabama, Birmingham area. And we'll have kids who come to that camp, and every now and then we'll cover some of this same kind of material. We do different topics, themes every year. And sometimes we'll go to other places and speak, and I can't tell you how many times in the last 22 years I've been at AP where we'll have young people write us and say, yeah, that stuff you just talked about evolution, about these alleged proofs of evolution, we just covered that, and they will have been back in school about 2 or 3 weeks, like in August and September. We just learned about that. And there will be times where we'll get communication from students or teachers about the teachers who said, I had no idea about this. I've been teaching this thinking it was right because it was in the textbook. And sometimes it's just not right. By the way, let me just say, by the way, what if the story was right? What if the story, the exact way it's told in the textbook, what if it all is right? What does it actually prove? That you can have lighter colored moths at times, more of those at times than darker colored moths and vice versa? Can there be an animal population that increases and decreases over time for various reasons, and yet it not be any way proof of the general theory of evolution? Of course. By the way, let me say that we do need to make sure we define our terms. And so when we talk about evolution, evolution in its most basic sense means to unroll, to unfold, or to change. And so are we, in a sense, evolving in a sense? Well, yeah. Listen, this is probably the first time Johnny has seen me in a number of years. Johnny, I have more gray hair than you've probably ever seen. Well, you got a little bit of gray hair back there too, don't you? Thanks for letting me pick on you today, by the way. So I have a lot more gray hair than I did 10 or 15 years ago. I am evolving, hopefully, into a wiser man. I have more around my midsection than I think I've ever had. I need to do something about that, but I've been telling myself I need to do something about that for a while. I am expanding. I put on some breeches yesterday, and I was like, honey, did you dry these things? She said, yes, I always dry these things. Like, man, it's not even Christmas yet, and I've already put on a little bit more weight around the middle. In the sense of what we sometimes call microevolution, it is evolution within limits. I told y'all I have a little dog. He's a half weenie dog, half Springer Spaniel. The people who gave him to us, they called it a spring weenie. I'd never heard of a spring weenie. I think they just made it up to make us like want to get the dog. And he's something else. But you know, we have Great Danes, or whatever kind of dog you were telling me about last night, Gary. Mastiff. I don't know much about Mastiffs, but I've heard of Great Danes, and I know of Chihuahuas. They're both dogs. I mean, you know, can you imagine people finding a Chihuahua in the fossil record, which I don't know that we've ever found one in the fossil record, by the way, or a Great Dane in the fossil record, which again, I don't know that we've ever found one, and them thinking, oh, that's the same animal. And do you think that's the conclusion that they would come to? I kind of doubt it. Kind of doubt it. So we have a lot of change that happens within limits. Listen, there used to be a Brangus Steakhouse in Jasper, Alabama. I don't think it's there anymore, but you know what? Logically, it could not have been there 150 years ago. You know why? Any ranchers in here? There wasn't a Brangus breed. That's exactly right. And I don't know much about cows either, but I do know they had some pretty good steaks there. I will say that. But you know, the Angus and the Brahman had not yet gotten together in the way that they got together, and we didn't have Brangus cows, but we do now. Well, is that a form of evolution? In a sense, there's a change, but let me ask you this. Are Brangus cows ever going to become ostriches? Are they ever going to become rhinos? I mean, hey, what? No. No, no, no. You can take a spring weenie and you can, you know, combine it with a half Chihuahua, half poodle, and I don't know what you're going to get, but it's still going to be a dog. Still going to be a dog. You've never seen a turtle evolve into, well, see what the evolutionists say is, well, you give it enough time. You know who the God is of evolutionary theory? It's time, supposedly. Because supposedly, time works miracles. I don't know about you, but I hadn't seen time work any miracles. I've been waiting on a Porsche for a long time, and it hasn't appeared yet. I've been waiting on $1 billion, $1 million. You know, you've heard of billionaires and millionaires. I'm a thousandaire, okay? I got 1,000 or 2, okay? So I've been waiting on a time. Time hasn't brought me $1 billion or whatever. Time doesn't work miracles. We've not seen, you can sit around all day long and you're not going to see a supernatural miracle just come about because of time. Ernest Haeckel said that the turning point in his thinking was when he read Charles Darwin's, you know it, Origin of Species. And he was convinced that evolution was true. And so he came up with the idea known as embryonic recapitulation, the idea of, and these were his drawings back in the latter part of the 1800s, that supposedly the human in utero goes through the evolutionary stages of our alleged animal ancestors. I mean, here is the way the picture looks in our textbook here. I'll just read it from the textbook. As you can see, the embryos of fish, chicken, rabbit, and human appear almost identical in the early stages. What does this mean? Uh-oh, is this proof of evolution? I mean, imagine being a sixth grader reading this. Here's your textbook for your 9-week course, or the 9-week part of your class. That is, these organisms all share a common heritage. Similarities in the embryos of different organisms indicate these organisms share not a common creator, but a common ancestor. The similarities in the early stages of embryo development are further evidence that the living things have evolved from earlier living things and that many living things share a common ancestor. Well, there are a few problems with this. You know, you got on the left side, you have like fish, and then I think it's a salamander, and then a turtle and chicken and pig and etc., and then a human there at the end by his drawings. Problem is, his drawings were really way off. His drawings were way off, number one. Also, since we've known this for 100 years now, that it was expected, according to evolutionists, that the embryo would retrace or recapitulate the features of its ancestors from the lowest to the highest forms of the animal kingdom. Now that the appearance of the embryo at all stages is known, the general feeling is one of disappointment. Well, why is that? The human embryo at no stage is anthropoid or monkey-like in appearance. We've known this for 100 years, brothers and sisters, and it's still in textbooks. Stephen Jay Gould actually admitted, he said, Ernest Haeckel remains most famous today, and he wrote this in the year 2000 in Natural History magazine, as the chief architect and propagandist for a famous argument that science disproved long ago, but that popular culture has never fully abandoned. He said, we should therefore not be surprised that Haeckel's drawings entered 19th century textbooks, but we do, I think, have the right to be both astonished and ashamed by a century of mindless recycling that has led to the persistence of these drawings in a large number, if not majority, of modern textbooks. Isn't that sad? Sad admission about, you know, I tell you what, sometimes it's just, I was talking to or texting with my children this week, and I said, guys, you know, Bo, Micah, Shelby, let me just send I called it a dad text. I said, would you just bear with a dad text for a minute? Can I just tell you some dad stuff? Be careful where you get your news. Be careful where you get your news. Because if you're getting your news from social media, then what we have seen, what we have learned in recent days and weeks is that at least some social media platforms, they are very much have filtered what they will let you see and what they won't let you see. Some of the problem with news is not always you're lied to, it's that you're not given the whole story, the big picture, the accurate picture of things. And so my dad text was, hey, you know what happens in a lot of textbooks is they'll just tell you a little bit of truth or some lies or a part of the story, but not the whole story. And the whole story is, wait a minute, this has been around for a long time, and people have known that this is a lot of mindless recycling. Before I go next, and I don't know how much time I have left, you remember that Paul said in 1 Thessalonians 5 that we need to test all things and hold fast what is good. My encouragement to our young people in here is be polite to your teachers, be respectful, be loving, be kind, but don't believe everything a teacher says just because they read it from a textbook or say it. You shouldn't believe everything a preacher says because of that. You should test all things, hold fast to what is good. So let me just say again with this, you know, the story that they tell, it's not even true. But let me just say, what if it was true? What if at some point when I was a little zygote or an embryo in my mama's belly, I know it's not, belly's not the scientifically accurate term there. Okay, I get it. But what if I looked a little bit like a fish at one time, or a little bit like a monkey or something? I mean, just kind of looked that way. I'm just saying, what would that actually prove? Number one, we don't. We don't have gill slits like they thought that maybe we had because Ernst Haeckel said that. We don't have a tail like they once alleged. My point is this. If you go back one page in this textbook, you see these illustrations of a human, a bat, a killer whale, and a dog. And here's what you read about it. Look closely at the structure of the bones in the bat's wing, the dog's foreleg, the whale's fin, the human's arm. These similarities, here's what they indicate, allegedly, indicate that each organism has evolved from a common ancestor. Not a common creator, a common ancestor. They say that, but let me just ask you this. They allege that, they say that, but where's the proof of that? Well, Eric, you have a similar arm like your dog's leg. Well, listen, my dog is half weenie dog. His leg is kind of short and kind of small. Okay, there's some similarities. Yes, they are. And you know what? Christians and creationists, to my knowledge, have never denied that. When I go, my dog, every morning, every night, we come home from work, you know what he does? He's coming to us. He's coming to the kitchen. He's coming to us. He's going to his bowl. He's coming to us. What does he want? He wants water. He wants food. The same